Welcome to your Friday edition of Forecast Lab. A couple of areas we're focusing on for today: a monsoon pattern in the southwestern U.S., and the remains of Hurricane Debby moving into the northeastern region. Let's take a look at that upper air chart because this is the key to what's happening. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. This is up at 250 millibars, about 34,000 feet. We've got a large cutoff high across the Northwest Territories. That is causing a heat wave up there in the Arctic. Temperatures coming up into the 70s and 80s. We've also got a polar front jet across Northern California into Chicago, Des Moines, and into Quebec. The remains of Debby being picked up by that progressive circulation, so that'll be swept rapidly into the Canadian Maritimes. And we've got this little low-pressure area aloft, or low heights, located around Lake Superior. That's going to be associated with a pocket of cold air in the low and mid-levels. The surface map for this morning shows a large area of cold advection across the Great Lakes, the Midwest, and the central U.S., driving this cold front into Ohio, Tennessee, and Texas. Some of the upslope flow there in Texas, especially in the panhandles, producing numerous showers and thunderstorms around and just north of Amarillo. Part of that front hung up in the Rockies, and the monsoon at its diurnal minimum, so not much going on right now, but that will be flaring up later this afternoon as the heating starts up once again. Here we have the remains of Hurricane Debby moving into Pennsylvania, and it's taken on a baroclinic structure. In other words, it's starting to behave like a frontal system with warm fronts, cold fronts, and areas of enhanced lift. A quick check of the radar mosaic overnight into this morning shows the center of the circulation moving through western Virginia and starting to approach parts of Maryland and Pennsylvania. As we go into late morning and afternoon, that will be crossing over into New York. Let me show you the precipitation panels. This is from the 3-kilometer NAM run, and as we go into the morning hours, bands of convection moving into parts of Pennsylvania and New York, crossing firmly into New York by this afternoon, and on up into Vermont, New Hampshire, and Quebec by early evening. There will be a frontal boundary associated with the tail end of this system, and that'll continue to produce showers and thunderstorms going into this evening across parts of New York, Boston, and Atlantic City. Some hefty precipitation totals. These go all the way back to Sunday. You can see around Tampa anywhere from 12 to 18 inches. Another cluster of very heavy rain through Charleston on up into North Carolina. Those values anywhere from 7 to maybe 17 inches. The precipitation still in progress in Virginia and Pennsylvania, so these are not final values, but already the ground certainly saturated, and they're expecting to get another 3 to 4 inches. There's a look at those hazards, a large flood watch all the way from the Canadian border near Montreal, clear on down towards Charleston, and embedded within that, some severe watches in effect from the Washington, D.C. area, all the way down towards the northeastern parts of North Carolina. And you can clearly see what's involved here with the precipitable water well over 2 inches all the way from the Carolinas up to New York. So that means very high precipitation efficiencies. Doesn't take much to get very high precip amounts. The saving grace is the fast forward translation of the system, so any convection that gets going will progress rapidly northward. If this thing had slowed down to 5 to 10 miles an hour instead of 25, we would be looking at precip totals anywhere from 5 to 10 inches and even higher. But thankfully, we're not really looking for that. The precipitable water going into the remainder of tonight, pretty well concentrated along that frontal zone, along the northeast coast, and then rapid clearing, dry advection in the wake of the system going into this weekend. And there is a big air show at Orange County, New York, and that's probably going to be a go. Returning to the surface map, let's advance that into the afternoon hours. There you can see all that precipitation up there in New York. In the southeastern U.S., things quieting down, a couple of boundaries, but not really enough moisture to generate a lot of widespread precipitation. However, the heat will be back, especially ahead of this cold front here, and maybe even along it. We've got heat advisories extending all the way from Jacksonville up to Montgomery, down to Pensacola, Gulfport, New Orleans, and Baton Rouge. We could see heat indexes there this afternoon near 110. And there you can take a gander at those highs for this afternoon. These are official Weather Service forecast highs from a human forecaster. Looking at 96 there at Jacksonville, 95 in Atlanta, 97 at Mobile, and 95 at New Orleans. There's the situation in Texas, a continuation of that heat wave. Looking for 100 degrees around San Antonio, 96 at DFW. But up to the north, a combination of cold advection, rain-cooled air, bringing the highs down into the 60s and 70s. And it gets even nicer as you go north, 60s in Nebraska. And you head up towards the Minnesota Arrowhead, 50s. What could be causing that? Well, we refer back to that friendly surface chart. I've got the pressures in black. I've got the thickness in red. Even got the decameters labeled there. See, there's 5610 decameters. That thickness is kind of like an average temperature in the lower atmosphere, basically from the middle of the troposphere down to the surface. So the coldest air is found, yeah, you guessed it, up there in Minnesota. So we can use this to kind of monitor the progress of air masses. And this is better than using temperature because temperature is influenced by elevation. It's influenced by diurnal processes, by precipitation, stuff like that. So it's not the best thing to be using. This is more of a average of what the air mass is doing at all levels, and it's got it kind of smoothed across different temperatures and weather regimes. So this is ideal to be using, and we can see that we form these boxes right here. That is the thickness box method, and the smaller those boxes are, the stronger the cold advection. Take a look through here. Where's the smallest boxes? That's probably going to be right in here. You notice the isobars are very close together, which indicates a strong pressure gradient, strong winds, which means the air is on the move. And also we've got very tight thickness gradients, indicating a strong thermal gradient, which means you're going to replace warm air with cold air very rapidly. So the combination of that with strong wind means very strong advection, and that has a major influence on the weather aloft. When you have very strong cold air advection, that's going to give you troughing in the upper levels. So everything is closely tied together. And one way we can see the troughing is with the heights and vorticity chart at 500 millibars in the middle troposphere. This is kind of a complicated chart, so I'm not going to go too much into detail on this, but up here you can see some red indicating positive vorticity, and that's being caused by the presence of cold air. It kind of deforms the structure of the atmosphere. That's closely correlated with troughing, especially at smaller scales. So these are some things you can use to find disturbances and frontal processes going on in the atmosphere. And speaking of frontal processes, I don't often show these charts because they do take a lot of time, but this is a good opportunity to show this. And what you see here, this is low pressure at 925 millibars. This is up at about 3,000 feet or so. So it's just off the surface. And we see a little frontal gradient across Ohio, Indiana. That's indicating a cold front. And where's that going to be? Maybe one here. It's kind of a dual structure going on, something like that. There's the main low. There's an occlusion up north and an occluded front in between. And in behind, strong cold advection. You can see those colder temperatures Typically, to assess the cold air, we go to 850 millibars. And there you go. What are the 850 millibar temperatures? Down to 8 Celsius at Chicago. So that's going to be about 46 Fahrenheit at 5,000 feet. So if the old Sears Tower, I guess what do they call it, the Willis Tower? I prefer to call it the Sears Tower. If that was 5,000 feet high, it would be 46 degrees up at the top. That's just amazing. So that shows you the strength of that cold air coming down. And this is going to knock the temperatures down into the 40s later tonight. The highs tomorrow, those are going to be in the 70s. So some very pleasant weather there. And I believe they have an air show going there in downtown Chicago over the weekend. So I've got one quick puzzle for you. Why is there no temperature data in the Rockies? What's going on there? Well, keep in mind this is 850 millibars, which is about 5,000 feet. What's the elevation here? It's probably more like 7,000 or 8,000 feet. So we can't really legitimately get a temperature reading. We can extrapolate the pressure to some extent. That's kind of sketchy to be doing that, but we certainly can't do that with temperature. You would have to send a thermometer down into a mine shaft, figure out your depth, but you might be getting heat from the rocks. So there's no good way of assessing the temperature at 850 millibars in this area. On some websites, they will draw it, but generally that's an extrapolation of data into the mountainous regions. So that's one thing to be aware of. Anyway, at 850 millibars, we can plot the 850 millibar cold front. It's probably going to run something like that. And I would just bring that down into Texas as well. So that's going to be an 850 millibar front, and it uses the hollow barbs like that. And there's also a 850 millibar warm front, probably going to be right in here somewhere. Okay. And then, of course, the occlusion going further to the north. We have an active monsoon pattern going in the southwestern U.S., and that's a response to pressure falls due to the very strong heating across much of the western U.S. Here's the mean sea level pressure in July. You can see the pressure deficits out there in the southwestern U.S. On the other hand, in the southeastern U.S., we've got this Bermuda high kind of pushing into the southeastern states and maybe even into part of Mexico. So some of that air is going to migrate over to the desert southwest, and some of it will get drawn up from the tropical regions as well. And that is the monsoon that carries with it moisture from those southerly latitudes. One way we assess the monsoon is with the dew points. Those are going to be in the lower left of these plots, and we have some very high values around Tucson, 65 to 63. We've got 67 at Phoenix. That's like Gulf moisture quality. 60 at Las Vegas. 62 at Blythe. So that is some very muggy air helping to support these areas of precipitation. There's a closer look at that. So yes, this is a classic monsoon pattern. And only when we go up to the north towards Area 51, Tonopah, and Austin, we drop into the 30s and 40s, and that is more of a desert-type air mass. It is very dry in the San Joaquin Valley, 50s dew points, so even though they're quite warm there, it is quite a difference from the air mass we have further out to the east. A little bit of good news for today. No heat advisories except in the Antelope Valley of California. That's actually going to be on Saturday. They're looking for highs of 105 to 110 there. Across the lower deserts, 105 to 110. And in the San Joaquin Valley, about 95 to 105. There is a little bit of heat up to the north. Well, obviously, Oregon still being battered by 90s and wildfires, but in Seattle, look at this, 86 for a high, 80 at Bellingham. They do have heat advisories in that area for today. Highs will be in the upper 80s to lower 90s. A quick check of aviation weather. I used to be an aviation forecaster. I don't know if we have any pilots on here, but we'll just run through this very quickly. In the northeastern U.S., of course, Debby moving northward, widespread IFR and marginal VFR. We're expecting ground stops in New York City today, numerous flight delays there, and possible ground stops at Philadelphia, Washington, and Baltimore, with others later today at Boston. Numerous thunderstorms associated with that monsoon pattern across the Rockies, some spreading into Kansas and Colorado for this afternoon. And we do have wildfire problems across much of the northwestern U.S. Smoke will be restricting visibilities, and be aware we have numerous TFRs all the way from the Sierras up into the Great Basin area, into Oregon and Washington, and that's due to firefighting activities. So definitely check those products before you head out in the western U.S. As far as icing, well, we don't really think of that in summertime, but there definitely could be that with those extensive stratiform and convective layers across the northeastern U.S. That'll be mostly from the freezing level, about 15,000, 16,000 feet, up to about 20 to 23,000. And due to the presence of that polar front jet across the Midwest and the central U.S., could be a few bumps all the way from Denver to Chicago out to New York City. Fortunately, that will mostly just be light chop. And we shift gears and look at the tropics. There goes the outgoing post-tropical cyclone Debby, but our attention shifts down here around the Cape Verde Islands. Another disturbance is possible this week, and that could move up towards the Leeward Islands and towards Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. Here's a technical look at things with the what I call the detrimental effects chart. At the very beginning, we see the Bermuda High. So just kind of trade winds right through this area. What does the atmosphere look like? It is favorable for tropical cyclone development. The negative factors, that's going to be this blue color, which indicates strong shear in the lower levels, and this brown color, which indicates dry air. Both of those things are detrimental to cyclone formation. So we step this forward through Saturday and Sunday, just trade winds, a few weak disturbances rolling through, and there is our little disturbance right there, reaching the Leeward Islands on Tuesday, and then rolling across Puerto Rico around Thursday, and then into the Gulf Stream, Bermuda, out in that area by Saturday. And you can see the GFS pretty much recurves this rapidly and does not take it into the U.S. But this is a very early look at this system. I mean, it hasn't even developed. So we don't have much information to go on. And just the very slightest change in the track, well, that could carry it more like that. So a lot of questions right now. What we do know is that the GFS and the ECMWF, the European model, those do agree on the general track, keeping that off of the East Coast. So I'm going to leave it at that. We'll look at that again for next week. So let's go ahead and put the maps into motion and look at the forecast. Going into tonight, we finally clear out the remains of Debby, except for Maine and the Maritimes. Improving conditions in New York and in the populated cities in the northeastern corridor. In the central U.S., more storms going up in the Texas panhandles. So another active night there. Then we go into Saturday. Little push of cold air into the southern U.S. all the way down into Mississippi and Louisiana, but it will be modified. So we're not going to see any of that very pleasant 70s that we had up to the north. A marginal risk for Saturday in the northern panhandles. Once again, you can see that little pressure gradient right there. Moisture return, moisture nose. So storms will go up once again. There they are right there along that frontal boundary. A temporary lull in the monsoon in the southwestern U.S., maybe some storms in the higher elevations. But overall, Saturday will quiet down a little bit in Arizona. Most of the activity will be in Colorado, Utah, and especially up there in Wyoming and Montana. Then we go on into Sunday. I'm going to bring this all the way up to peak convective time. A potent low-pressure area there in Nebraska, so good chances for rain in Nebraska and Kansas. In the northeastern U.S., cold conditions pushing into that part of the country. Widespread overnight 50s in the interior of the northeastern U.S. with 60s on the coast. A rainy pattern in Florida, especially up there in northern Florida. and the monsoon begins building once again across Arizona and the Four Corners, and continued monsoon activity in Utah and Colorado. Then we go into Monday. Yeah, lots of rain on the high plains, Denver, Lamar, Cheyenne. They could see thunderstorms there. A little bit of involvement with that frontal zone. Very warm in Texas. We start seeing 100s there once again. And another cool morning for the northeastern U.S. with overnight lows in the 50s and 60s. Then for Tuesday, well, we start getting a little bit of downslope flow in the northern plains, some heating. Those temperatures will be coming up into the 90s at Rapid City. Chadron will be up to 94, Glendive 87. And in the southwestern U.S., the same old monsoon pattern, but kind of settling in a little bit more along the Continental Divide and the Four Corners. Not so much in the western deserts. Then for Wednesday, another hot day in parts of the south, especially in southern Mississippi. We're expecting to see 100 degrees around Hattiesburg, Mississippi. A little bit of drying in the monsoon pattern there in Arizona. The precipitation not as widespread. And the big bad heat wave continues in Texas, up to 103 at Abilene, 101 at DFW, and 101 at San Antonio. Then we go into Thursday, a stagnant weather pattern in Texas, 100s once again. Lots of rain with this developing kind of like an Alberta Clipper right there through the Midwest. Strong cold front coming into Missouri and Kansas. And as far as that southwest monsoon, again, concentrated mostly in the Continental Divide and the Four Corners. And that's all for this edition of Forecast Lab. Hope you found it informative and educational. I do want to thank Greg for this excellent aerial footage out there in the Texas Hill Country. And also a special thanks to Mike Lammers, our newest Patreon supporter. If you watch this program a lot and you get a lot out of it, I do ask that you support us, either through Patreon, there's the link for that, or you can pick up a copy of my books or software at weathergraphics.com. We will return once again on Monday for the private video for the Patreon supporters, and on Wednesday for everybody else. Hope you have a great weekend. Take care, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.